I was going to talk a little bit about the importance of local action in the fight against mass surveillance. But the Bay Area Civil Liberties Coalition has had a nice little victory on our actual efforts against mass surveillance in our local community. There is a trade show called Urban Shield that the Department of Homeland Security puts on in Oakland. And that trade show will be the following weekend. And we've had two asks. One ask is that that trade show no longer be held in Oakland after this year, and that the trade show will not be held in Oakland next year. We also asked Congresswoman Barbara Lee not to hold a fundraiser at that same hotel at the Oakland Marriott where that trade show is going to be held, and she's not going to do that this weekend. The Urban Shield trade show. The specifics of what the Urban Shield trade show is it's essentially a vendor conference for militarized policing. So it's where the people who sell you your cell phone tracking devices, your license plate reading devices, your police body armor, your riot gear, come to market to local police departments gear that the Department of Homeland Security will kindly pay for your local police department to have. Local surveillance. So the basic sort of mental framework to be working with is whether or not you've been following what Edward Snowden is revealing about the NSA closely, or you've been sort of just getting a general sense that whatever can be broken, the NSA is breaking. Whatever data the NSA could be getting, they are getting. And whatever nefarious thing that they could be doing with it, they probably are doing with it. That's probably a good high-level summary. But when you look at the level of what that really means, that means that also the underlying economic rationale that makes that possible means that the same sorts of technologies, the same sets of techniques are being actively brought into your local communities. So your local police department, your local state government are facilitating many of the same techniques and tools, both for the benefit of the NSA and for their own use. And so really what Restore the Fourth is sort of interested in, and what we've been working with the Bay Area Civil Liberties Coalition to do, is to try to find points of leverage where we can actually, at the local level, bring this to a stop and meaningfully decrease the amount of mass surveillance that is in everyone's lives. So that's the kind of the mental framework with which we're working with. So we look at something like Urban Shield as an opportunity to push back against the mechanism by which the surveillance equipment comes into our communities. And the mechanism is that there are many vendors, many of them are war technology vendors because surveillance was a big part of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, who are coming and now are attending these trade shows, offering equipment for sale to local police departments, to the state law enforcement, for the acquisition of sort of data that can be stored and logged and made available to fusion centers in the NSA. So that's why we thought we've looked at this opportunity of achieving some small, measurable, important goals in terms of Urban Shield and highlighting these issues with our protests next Friday as a very important thing that we are doing on the cause of mass surveillance. So that's going on. And the Urban Shield victories are kind of a symbol of the fact that the underlying environment for this type of policing and this type of behavior from law enforcement is becoming more adverse for them. Ferguson has been a major symbol of sort of delegitimization of the police state. And there's really, on one hand, we look at Ferguson as a racial issue, and certainly those issues are more difficult in the South, but they're also part of the tendency of all of our police departments across the country to behave like an occupying force that need to be surveilling all of us all of the time because we may be in some way a threat to people in power. So when we look at what we can do about this, we have opportunities at the local and the state level to actually meaningfully push back. Probably another optimistic thing that has been happening in California has been the movement towards the passage of AB 1327, which is basically a drone warrant bill. Any drone that a law enforcement entity acquires will need a warrant to be used, except in sort of a crisis situation. And it's an incredibly good bill. It's made it through the Assembly, it's passed the Senate, and from what I've been hearing, I think Governor Brown is actually going to is under enough political pressure to sign it, which is kind of a game changer in California. Governor Brown has vetoed virtually every form of meaningful privacy legislation that has made it through the California State Legislature. And if you look at the efforts of what's been happening in LA, where the Los Angeles County Sheriff has LAPD, the Los Angeles Police Department has gotten a gift of 2 drones from Seattle that Seattle's police department bought, and then when their city council found out that they bought them, banned their use. So then they gave it to Los Angeles. So it's incredibly pressing, given that San Jose has acquired a drone, that LA has these 2 drones as a gift, that we get a drone warrant passed in California, because what we can imagine, given the decreasing cost of this kind of surveillance technology, is persistent overhead aerial surveillance of all public places, barring some sort of drug legislation. There have already been sort of trials of that in surrounding California, where communities have been monitored from the air for prolonged periods of time, and everyone and everything that has happened has been tracked. So the underlying economics of this are very harmful to the continued function of democratic processes in this country. And what we're looking at doing with our local legislative efforts is fighting back against them. And I think we've got some really good opportunities right now to do this. There is movement in Oakland that Restore the Fourth is supporting towards passing a sort of a global privacy policy on all surveillance equipment acquired by the city. And that is an effort that Restore the Fourth has been working really closely with Oakland Privacy on, and is an effort that Restore the Fourth wants to take national through our municipal ordinance initiative to try and get cities across the country to adopt a single piece of a single model bit or ordinance that would basically restrain whatever gifts that the Department of Homeland Security decides to bring our way. So that's part of our structure of making progress on this issue. The other parts of our efforts are to really focus on moving other state level bills like privacy of your sort of cloud storage forward, and other opportunities to move state level. I think what Norman Solomon was talking about the incredible amount of despair about the situation at the federal level is largely accurate. There's really not been major progress on a bill that would actually solve the problem. Most of the bills, like the Freedom Act that have moved through, have focused on almost entirely on the first week of Snowden revelations, and we're a year in. And so the problem is much bigger and much deeper than the powers that be in the federal government want to deal with. And so the primary, I think, opportunity to build a national movement that will inform legislatures and the judiciary that the people of the United States are not going to tolerate this is to work on the local level. So that's basically our pitch. Department of Homeland Security will give a grant for X number of $100,000 to the city to buy equipment XYZ. And your police department is going to have to make that request to the city council. So how do you convince these police departments that they need this invasive surveillance gear? So you hold these urban shield training sessions where you show how great this surveillance gear is, all the great things you can use it for. By great, I mean horrible in this context. And that is what Urban Shield works, how Urban Shield works operationally. So they've held the first one in Oakland, and then it was such a success that they now hold them all over the country.
Yeah.
There are exercises that go on all over the country that have other names. Silver Sentinel goes on in California, but Urban Shield itself is just in Boston and Fort Worth.
Okay.
And I don't know what the dates are of those two, but we should definitely protest them. And the victory that we've won about not having it at the Marriott, which essentially means not having it in Oakland next year, just means that they will hold it somewhere else in the Bay Area. So we have to find out where and protest there, starting almost immediately.
Well, just to the question of, like, we've disturbed the status quo. The status quo is to hold it at the Marriott in Oakland. It provides an opportunity for continued activism around this issue.
I don't mean to sound cynical, but this business with Hollywood and these stars being outed on the cloud or whatever it was, is there any way that a movement such as Urban Shield or against all this militarization and surveillance could connect with Hollywood, because people pay attention to Hollywood, and there's a lot of outrage over what went on that has nothing to do with civil rights, but I think there's a good connection to be made there.
So I'll give you a couple of somewhat off topic, but there are actually some really incredibly intimate connections between the assaults that were conducted on these female celebrities and the surveillance state. Specifically, the way that this worked, what these female celebrities were subjected to was a long-term, prolonged assault on their digital security by a group of motivated people, which is what we are all subjected to by the NSA. The mechanisms of subverting that security were largely the same as law enforcement and the NSA use, and that they have campaigned very hard to make sure that those mechanisms are in place. The specific way in which these photos were obtained from people's iCloud accounts was through a piece of software sold by a Russian company to law enforcement agencies called Elcomsoft, I believe is the name of the company, and I don't remember the name of the particular software package. But basically what happened is that once the celebrities' passwords were obtained, the hackers were able to obtain a piece of law enforcement software and then use that law enforcement software to drain their account of all of their photos and whatnot. And that software exists specifically so, for instance, if somebody like your local police department takes an interest in you, they may or may not get a warrant, they may brute force or come to Apple with a court order, and then they might drain your account of all of its data for their later analysis. So if we built an internet where what has happened to these female celebrities could not happen to them, we would be much better positioned to defend ourselves against the NSA. They do some things that are terrible, some things that are bad, and they do many other things that are good in terms of protecting people from mass surveillance. And it's something of a mixed bag. There are also many companies in the Bay Area and around the country that do nothing but things that I think are objectionable. Except for, I don't know, pay their workers or something. Their entire product line is surveillance software, lawful interception. Lawful interception is the government word for government hacking. And there are many companies, especially in the Bay Area, who make hardware and software for government to facilitate government hacking. And I think it would be great to actually do something that really highlights their existence and their completely morally objectionable nature.
Tour of shame.
And I think that could be a stronger tour of shame than a tour of shame that visits Yahoo and Google. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, I'm from the tech world. I have a Bay Area software startup and all that sort of stuff. On a lot of the tech news sites and tech forums, there is quite a bit of resentment for mass surveillance, etc. Just by the engineers who actually work at these places, but there is also quite a few of them who work at these places who are doing it just for a paycheck, etc. And so one of the things that I feel like might be a good option, going off of Norman's strategy of doing something that they don't want you to do, is to try and siphon away workers. To say, hey, go work for Google for the same money instead of working for this company, that sort of thing. I don't know if that's throwing that out there.
Yeah, I don't know. I've identified 3 companies that I now make only hacking software in the Bay Area. I sent that out on one of my emails. I kind of like to extend that list to militarized policing companies in general. And I think that might be a very powerful tour of shame to do, and I think would be a very different story than than like going back to the same old, well, Google does some good things and does some bad things.
But, you know, we've really got to look at what the city of Berkeley did and what the city of Washington, D.C. did, both with large vulnerable populations and impoverished and indigent and homeless populations, the same as San Francisco. So for San Francisco to talk all this talk about being such a compassion center and et cetera, there shouldn't be any reason why we can't do this, you know, and you'll hear the cries from the club owners, well, but we do this. Well, then great. Why would this bother you?
And they're acting like they're doing it already. So
Right,
if they're
so
doing it
great.
already, then why the rub? What's the rub if they're already doing it?
Right. What would you have to protest if we have uniform minimum standard of care across the city for each dispensary? Well, if you're already doing it, well, then maybe you should stand up with us and say, hey, I'd like everybody in the city to at least come up to the quality of what I do. How's that for a rub?
One of the main responses would be accountability. Some of the dispensaries do not want to actually hold accountability, saying we do this, but not according to paperwork. They actually do not do what they say to do.
Well,
That's
some of
what-
them were taxed on what they were giving away too. They were having to pay taxes on all cannabis, including what they gave away.
Right, which, you know, Betty Yee did try who's the chairman of the Board of Equalization, and she did try to answer that question about taxation and et cetera, but the tax on it, you know, if you do your math, you know, you sit down with your board of directors and figure it out, and then people also have to remember, we're talking at this point in the, you know, game, we're talking about asking multi-million-dollar corporations built upon activism started in our city by people who were dying to give back a very small percentage to the people that actually, made them.
Well, I'm going to give you for an example. The average MCD in San Francisco per week sells at least an average of 5 to 10 pounds. That's a minimum of medical cannabis. 5% of 5 pounds will help at least maybe 10, 15 patients right there automatically. So if MCDs are having a problem distributing compassion, then that means they're saying, okay, we're here for money, not for patients.
Yeah, it's a definitely profits before patients question that we're putting out there to the Board of Supervisors to help us solve. Good news is that we are moving forward. I did have a meeting with Sunny in Jane Kim's office, and yeah, and it seemed to go well. We're looking at, you know, talking with Berkeley about how they're taking care of their patients under this law and sort of asking for their playbook on how to negotiate it.
Of course, you gotta remember that you want to bring back the measure about 2007 about Supervisor Dan Ross-Marcarini about how he helped the cannabis community.
Well, what actually happened was that Axis of Love kind of bit Ross's ankle for, you know, a good year or so about,
Yeah.
you know, thank you for passing something for the businesses. And what we passed for the businesses was the regulations were good, but the intent came from Americans for Safe Access, who were going up and down the coast at that point and putting restrictive permitting before the Board of Supervisors to kind of push off some of the mom and pop dispensaries that were coming into play. So we got this great set of regulations for the businesses. We shut down with that regulations, unfortunately, about 22 clubs. And then we bit Ross in the ankles about, okay, well, let's do a little something for the patients. And so and he supports it, you know, but actually, you know, was getting a lot of blowback from people that were campaign contributors of his. And so there, it became, a resolution, which by its nature is non-binding. And I think that
Are
both.
you referring to Proposition S?
No, I'm actually referring to the resolution. The Proposition S, which happened in 2002, was only a policy question. I constantly have patients come up to me and say, yeah, but the voters passed Prop S, which means the city's supposed to grow, for low-income patients, and we're supposed to get a portion of that city garden. I'm like, wow, no, actually all that was on, that the voters voted on, it started out with should and ended with a question mark. There was no accompanying legislation that actually helped us develop these communal city gardens, which is another thing that we can start working on now, because now they don't have the excuse of the feds will come and take our building.
Yeah, the political climate's changed now.
So drastically, and now's the time to move this. Now's the
Now.
time to get that patient garden from the city.
I like the Justice Department crackdowns in 2011, 2012 in San Francisco.
And
Exactly.
reinstate compassionate dispensaries like HopeNet, Vapor Room,
Sanctuary.
Divinity Tree.
Well, that's really a hard thing. I mean, that's something I really, we've put in so many policy pieces that we've turned into the city. We've
Like
asked
moving
them
to
to quiet.
nuisance? What about move to nuisance? That's what close to
Yeah,
some of them.
no, but that's not so much of a big deal right now because of the federal layoff and the zoning. We do have the capacity to open up the green zone. I think that's there. I don't think we're going to have the problems with the feds. I know people were hurt by that and had clubs closed by that, but today is a new day with that. But what we're struggling with actually is getting those compassionate providers of Sanctuary, Michael Welch, Divinity Tree, Raymond and Charlie, Vapor Room, HopeNet, getting those guys back on board is harder today than it was a year ago. We've got a lot of players that don't want the compassionate providers back on the map.
To show, for example,
Hello.
San Jose.
You're on the
Oh,
air.
there are some compassion dispensaries in San Jose that are being closed down because of the government saying, no, not in my backyard, NIMBYs.
And it's not even so much the NIMBYs as it is our own industry. People really have to step back and realize this is not coming from the neighbors. It's not coming from the neighbors. It's coming from people who are opportunistic lobbyists in our industry.
So that caused mainly compassionate dispensaries to close. It was quite a coincidence that all the dispensaries that closed
Everybody's puzzled about that. Like, wow, everybody in San Francisco is actually in violation of the 1,000-foot rule. There's actually nobody
I believe we have a
that's in
call.
the safe
I
zone.
believe we have a caller now.
Hello, you're on the air with
SF,
compassionate
Who are
cannabis
we?
care community.
SF Little Buzz, hello! Okay, caller?
We keep losing callers. We're sorry.
Oh,
In the meantime, would you like to show a little clip of
we might as well get to it before
what
the show's
happened
over.
yesterday at the Board of Supervisors meeting? And we'd like to apologize ahead of time. Their sound is very limited, but there's a plus side, there's closed caption. First of all, the speaking was shown yesterday. And the video will get clearer.
Well,
If you like to
Or
read along
maybe
with
it
the text.
won't,
I was trying to be polite.
But I was basically just laying out that it was time to do this and all the background support of it.
And what exactly were you elaborating here?
Well, I'm having trouble reading the captions, but
I'd like to
here
give
we're going
you
through
some-
the background. We're going through the background. So the task force, the medical cannabis task force, voted in support of this. The planning commission, the planning department. We have all of this groundwork done, over a decade of groundwork done to bring this forward.
You're
to
on the
city.
air.
Are we having technical
Yes, the
difficulties?
BCB might be having difficulties with the telephone system here. We apologize that,
Yes,
if that's the case.
we do apologize.
But I think that, one of the things that's disappointing for a lot of San Franciscans is it really should have been us that got this done first. It's really sort of, we have that egg on our face of having to follow first Washington D.C., our nation's capital, and then Berkeley.
San Francisco is a model city. We begin things here. For instance, we started the plastic bag ban. We started marriage equality
Well, it's a
here.
progressive city, and a lot of people want to destroy that too. So there's been a big push
We actually
for a long
started the
time
medical cannabis
to
legalization
destroy
of
the
cannabis
progressive.
here in California.
There's a concerted movement on the conservative side to destroy the progressive movement, which they feel the heart of which is in San Francisco, or historically, and now probably not, but they managed to really move everybody out. That's how they do it. You know, like they just gentrify us right out of here.
Right, and we don't want to be gentrified within our own medical cannabis community. I mean, and it's happening. We're seeing speculators come into our cannabis clubs in San Francisco and wanting to sterilize it, make it look like a bank, make it only transactional model, not have, you know, those old sick people hanging out in the lounge. You know, so there's a lot of stuff that kind of comes in our front door here that we have to sort of push out.
Who do they expect people to go into the lounge? Healthy patients?
Yes.
They
What
want
is a healthy patient? Someone who does not need cannabis. Someone who has no business being inside that place.
They actually, the bigger question is recreational might
That's what they're
overtake.
getting ready for.